Hi, and welcome to Tea and Strumpets. I'm your co-host, Zoe, and I am here all by myself today without Kelsey, but that's because we have a special episode, and so I wanted to do a bit of an introduction before we hopped right into it. So today we're going to be airing our first in a series of interviews with romance authors that I was lucky enough to participate in conjunction with my local library, the Escondido Library, and librarian Jessica Buck. And I am part of her virtual Bromance Book Club. We were in person for a while, but everything's virtual right now. And by the way, y'all should join. It's called Between the Covers Book Club. And she curates fabulous books to read. And not only that, great conversations, but a little bit of swag that comes your way for the books. And it's just a really great community. I mean, romance communities are always great. But anyhow, I'm getting a little bit off topic as to what we're doing today. So Jessica asked if I would be interested in joining her for a series of virtual chats with romance authors. But this was all the way back in May. So this was still when quarantine had started. We didn't know what was going on. And she's continued those chats still. She's got a summer series going on, but I was part of the spring series. So we're going to be sharing those chats with you guys today. It's a series of 6 chats, and this is the first one. And we don't want to have them all come at once, so we're going to be interspersing them through here and there. And all of these chats are going to feature different topics, different subgenres of romance, and they're really fabulous. But there are a few things that I do want to mention. The first thing is that this episode in particular was actually recorded in April, not even in May. This was recorded April 25th, 2020. And today we're going to be talking about contemporary romance and writing romance for today's reader with contemporary romance authors Kristin Rockaway and Lyssa Kay Adams. So this was recorded as a Facebook live stream through Zoom. So just so you guys know, the audio quality is not going to be quite what you're used to from us at Tea and Strumpets. But again, the content is really great. So we hope that you'll bear with us just as, it's not our normal setup. And the authors that'll be joining us, some of them have, slightly better setups than others, but everything is still very understandable. So hopefully it's still a good experience for you all. Also, we are not editing any of this. So there may be a little bit of pause or things a little bit different than you're used to, just because of the format that it was to do some of the editing. It just made it a little bit funky. So if you'd prefer to see the video format, you absolutely can. You can head on over to the Escondido Library YouTube to check all the videos out. And we do have a link to that in the show notes. So if you want to see the authors and yours truly, you can check us out there. But I want to say thank you again to the Escondido Library and to Jessica for inviting me to participate. And so we really hope you enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed being part of these chats and talking to all these authors. I learned so much, and I hope you all do too. And we're not going to be having a parlor today, so I'm going to give away what we're reading next week all the way here at the top of the show. So join us next week for 3 Weeks with Lady X by Eloisa James. Enjoy!
Well, hello and welcome to the Escondido Public Library Romance Chats. Yay! In this series, we're going to be talking to different authors that span the subgenres of romance. I'm Jessica Buck, Adult Services Librarian, and I've invited Zoe of Tea and Strumpets podcast to join me for this series. Zoe is part of our Library Romance Book Club and has a podcast devoted to historical romance novels.
I do. Hello, I'm Zoe, and thank you, Jessica, so much for bringing me in on this project. I am very excited to be involved. And today we're going to be talking to the 2 fabulous contemporary romance authors you see on your screen. But before we get into that, we just wanted to talk a little bit more about romance to set the scene. So I've prepared a statement about romance. But to the seasoned romance reader, romance is an empowering, feminist, and fulfilling genre. But to most of the world, romance is an easy punchline. And to be fair, romance has a storied history that at surface level does make it an easy target. But as we readers know, the moment that you stop and look just 1 millimeter below the surface, perhaps understand the landscape of the times that those books were written in and the sexual revolution that was taking place and the journey to a woman finding joy in sex, learning about her desires in a safe space, and the evolution of the genre in general, romance is so much more than its tropes. And I want to add that romance is also so much more than sex. While sex is an important part of many romance novels, as it represents another dimension to the relationship and another layer of intimacy through the characters, it is not the entirety of the genre in the same way, right, that sex isn't the entirety of a relationship in real life. And here I'd like to have a little quote from romance author Maya Rodale from her book called Dangerous Books for Girls, The Bad Reputation of Romance Novels Explained, where she said that romance novels, quote, declare via the happy ending that love is the most important thing and that love can exist between two people, no matter how they identify or whom they love. And love doesn't care about any rules. It seductively suggests that you, dear reader, might want to try this at home.
I love it. Couldn't have said it any better. All right. So today, as we mentioned earlier, we are joined by two fabulous contemporary romance novel authors, Kristin Rockaway and Lyssa Kay Adams. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is wonderful.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Absolutely.
And how are you guys?
It's fine.
And how are you guys holding up in your respective homes right now?
You want to start, Kristin?
It could be worse. It could be worse. It could be better. But, this is just what it is. I'm hanging in there. I'm with my husband and my son. My husband has taken up baking, so I am well fed. He made his first sourdough bread today, so that's good. And I'm, trying to get my work done and have my son up with his schoolwork and failing at both. So
relatable.
Yes.
Kind of ditto. I'm, home with my husband and my daughter. She's 14. So the schoolwork part is a little bit less intensive for me because she just sort of does that on her own. She's got her own little routine where she wakes up in the morning, late in the morning, and she does that on her own. But still there's a lot to keep up with, and she's very athletic. So the biggest thing for us is just keeping her busy because she's going absolutely stir crazy not having sports right now. And it's crazy to me. She has a daily Zoom practice with basketball. Somehow they're practicing via Zoom, like drills and workouts and stuff. It's so funny. But yeah, I've had to, I feel very fortunate. I mean, we're healthy, we're safe, we've got a nice house to stay in, can't complain. But I definitely, have had to change up my routine quite a bit. It's definitely affected my productivity.
Definitely understandable. I feel the same way in many respects. It's just a very big change of pace, and it just, you kind of have to adapt.
Go with it. Yeah. Been a lot of walking.
Yeah. I have my dog. I was already walking my dog every day, but now, we're taking like 4 walks, just chilling around.
Yeah. I'm actually quite sure that my dog at this point is like, are you ever going to leave the house again? Because you're kind of driving me nuts.
Sometimes my dog looks at me like he's annoyed,
Yeah, for sure.
Sitting on like chairs that he never sits on just because like we were on the couch.
Right. Yes.
I keep like trying to call my dog to come like hang out with me in the office, and she doesn't even respond anymore during the day. She's like, no, this is my time. Like I sit over here right now.
She needs her alone time.
Well, shall we get started talking about you guys and your books?
Sure.
All right. So I guess our first question is we want to know a little bit about you guys for the watchers. I wanted to say listeners. I'm used to saying listeners, but for the watchers here. So can you each tell us a little bit about you and the books that you write? And let's go ahead and start with Lyssa today.
Okay. So I write romantic comedies. I have a series through Berkeley right now called the Bromance Book Club. The first one came out in November, and then the sequel, Undercover Bromance, just came out in March, which feels like 18 months ago at this point, but it just came out March 10th. It's about a group of men who have a secret book club in which they read romance novels to become better partners. They call them the manuals because they think that they hold all the answers to love and relationships and women. I drew a lot on life experience a little bit. My husband is a sports writer. And so when I was sort of crafting some of the scenes in which the guys discuss romance novels, I literally thought, okay, so if I took my husband and his sports writer buddies and I locked them in a room with romance novels, what would that conversation sound like? And I draw a lot on that. But so romantic comedy is my genre, and that's my current series. So
awesome. Kristin, you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, so I also write what I think you would call a romantic comedy. Mine lean slightly toward more like women's fiction or like chick lit, if anyone remembers what chick lit used to be.
I do.
I love chick lit. And so that's but that doesn't exist anymore. So it's really a romantic comedy but it really explores the women's kind of journey, their whole journey, and romance is a big part of that journey. So that they're going on some journey of self-discovery. Like, for example, with How to Hack a Heartbreak, my last book, it was about a girl. Yeah, there it is. It's about a woman who she works for a startup incubator, and she's kind of the help desk. She's nobody really important. She's important, but nobody sees her as important. So she's treated like crap all day by guys at work. And then she dates online with like Flutter, it's called, so like Tinder. And she's treated like crap on these apps. So she decides to write her own app called Jerk Alert, that allows her to, any women it takes place in New York, any woman in the city to say, log their bad dates online or log their bad experiences with men online. And it starts as just like a little, joke for her friends. But then, of course, because it's a romantic comedy, it blows up in her face. And it's also a workplace comedy. So her love interest is at work. But it's about her journey to, not only finding love and building her ability to trust, but also her career journey and, navigating a male-dominated industry.
I will say that I've read your How to Hack a Heartbreak, Kristin, and I'm in the middle of the Bromance Book Club right now. And as a pretty much like completely historical reader, I've just been really excited going on this like contemporary journey. And, I work in tech. Kristin and I have met because we live in the same town. So I've seen her at a couple of book signings. And oh my gosh, that book is like, I have to say, like, I was like, this is my life. Like, oh my God, like the VC boys and all of the just like the jerks that you
bro culture.
Like, it was a little like, oh my God, moments, but also very vindicating.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, this is my life.
Yeah. And, I worked in software development for 15 years. Everybody knows that. So I was toward the end of my career, I was a head of a small software engineering department. And it's real. The men I work with by and large were very respectful and wonderful, but I worked a lots of clients who were like that. And it's funny because people, not funny, but like people read the book and they're like, oh, this doesn't really happen. No, it does.
You described a moment. I remember you described a moment where someone, like, I think she was like pitching her app or something, and they came in for the hug, and she like keeps her pelvis like away from the hug. And I was just like, how many times have I had to do that with clients? Like how many times where really like you want to say like, no, but you can't in the moment just because it's going to be
your client. You can't offend them, you know,
worse. Yeah.
You, and you're like, you know, a hysterical bitch causing a, you know.
Yeah. And I will just also freely admit, I started reading the Bromance Book Club. I was like intrigued by the premise, and I'm just like, I couldn't put it down. So now I'm through, but I'm just like, I need to keep going. I'm like so excited about what's going to happen. So if anyone watching has not read either of these books, pick them up. I think I highly recommend. Well, Jessica, you want to take us to our second question?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, here's the second one. So when did you start reading romance, and how did you make the journey from reader to writer?
Shall we switch it up and start with Kristin this time?
Perfect.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so I came late in life to romance, really. I read a lot of chick lit in my early 20s because I felt like that's what it was becoming really like popular. And that's when, like, I just felt like I related to them because I was the protagonists of these books. I was living in a city. I lived in New York. I'm from New York. I was living in the city and working on my career and for trying to date, you know, so it was a lot of like parallels between myself and these books. And I really loved them. But then I stopped reading them largely. Well, they stopped being produced in such large numbers, but I stopped reading them because I felt like I was being judged for it. Like, and it wasn't even necessarily like other people like being open about that judgment, but it was more my own sense of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be reading these, like, you know, I should be reading literary fiction or something smarter, you know, like it was almost a sense of like shame. But then, I wound up, you know, years passed to get married. I had a child. And when I was on maternity leave, I suffered from very severe postpartum depression. I had like a really hard time after I gave birth to my son. And what really helped bring me out of that was reading stories. Like I picked up these old chick lit novels that I loved from the early 2000s just to remember what that was like. And that led me, because I was looking at the publisher, and the publisher for this was Red Dress Inc., which was an old imprint of Harlequin.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
And they, you know, closed down Red Dress Inc. when chick lit became like not so popular, but then that led me to Harlequin. And so that's how I started reading romance, which is kind of, because I needed this happily ever after to just kind of keep me, you know, staying positive. And since then I've like, that's all I read. I really only read stories if I know they're going to have a happy ending.
Yeah, I'm now the same too. It's like I read exclusively romance, and I delve back into my fantasy novels if I know the author and trust them. Do you know?
Yeah.
It's a pact between the reader and the author, right? Like you know what you're going to get.
And once you realize that what romance is giving you is that sense of security of that happily ever after, and that happily ever after is there, like you can get emotionally invested in the characters, and you know that. And once you're doing that all the time, you kind of don't want to go back to not doing it. I mean, at least.
Yeah, I feel the same. I got to have that happy ending, or it's just stressful. I get too involved emotionally. It's like, oh my God, what's going to happen?
Yes. You feel cheated at the end where you're like, wait a minute, what? They die at the end?
That's why you have fan fictions.
So Lyssa, when did you first start?
Yeah, so I started reading romance probably, you know, earlier than I should have. I think like late middle school. My grandma read romances, and you hear that a lot from romance writers, that they were swiping them off their grandma's bookshelf. And that was true for me. She read, you know, all of the old classic names that, you know, Judith McNaught and Laverne Spencer and, you know, all of these, you know, these 80s writers and, you know, early 90s writers. And so that's how I started, you know, reading them. And I've always been a writer. I was that kid that that nerdy kid that always had a notebook full of ongoing stories that, she was working on. And I think I pretty much decided pretty early on that if I wanted to write fiction, that I would write romance. But I had a long career as a journalist, a newspaper reporter, before I switched to fiction. So, that was a very all-consuming career, almost 20 years. And so I was just sort of learning the craft for a long time, when I was working full-time as a reporter. And so it was when I left reporting that I was able to really focus on writing books. And so, but yeah, I think I pretty much always knew that I wanted to write romance. I love this, as we were just talking about, the happy endings and the hope and the stories of at least in the stories that I was reading back then. Thankfully, we've expanded the genre now, but it celebrated women's inner lives, and women always succeeded in the books I was reading, and I wanted stories like that. So.
And I'm curious, so it sounds like you were reading a lot of historicals when you started. So what brought you to writing contemporary romance?
That's a great question. It's always been that way. I have never wanted to write historicals. Although there is, in Bromance Book Club, I have a little snippet of, the book within the book. You get excerpts of the fake book, the book that they're reading. So I got a little taste of writing Regency, I don't know, 1,000 words of it. But contemporary, I think, is just always where my storytelling skills are. I think my voice is more suited to contemporary, and it's just those kinds of stories I've always wanted to tell. But I was reading contemporaries as well. But yeah, I mean, the big names when I started reading were definitely the big historical authors. Like I said, Laverne Spencer was huge. But eventually, Susan Elizabeth Phillips really made me fall in love with contemporary romance. When I started reading her, I was pretty much hooked on contemporary as well.
And Kristin,
she continues to be my favorite, so.
Yeah, she's great.
Kristin, did you ever read historical, or were you always the contemporary chick lit kind of reader?
Yeah, I was always a contemporary reader, and I didn't start reading historical until I started writing, because then, after I don't think I mentioned this, but how I got to writing was when my son was a year and a half old, I finally decided I wanted to quit my job and take 6 months off and finish the novel that I had been starting, forever. So I joined RWA, which I'm not a part of anymore, but I was a part of at the time. And Tessa Dare, I was part of the San Diego chapter, and Tessa Dare had come to she was like my first intro, like my first meeting I ever went to.
Oh man, what was Tessa Dare? Wow.
Yeah, right? And I had no clue at the time. And so I go, and I was like, oh my God, this woman is amazing. And I never really been drawn to historical, but then I read her whole Castles Ever After series, because that's when it first came out. It was like, oh my God, amazing. Yeah. So
she's basically the best gateway drug to historical romance for anyone,
because I did an event with her, right? So she was like my first intro to RWA. Then I did an event with her at Warwick's, which was like a dream come true. And then, she even admits this, that she doesn't necessarily always stick, there are some anachronisms in her stories, and she does that purposely, and I love that. I absolutely love it,
I can't help but ask, just because my history with romance was just I had a roommate who introduced me to it not many years ago, 6 years ago. And I think where I got into it before was fan fiction. I was reading tons of Harry Potter fan fiction, and it was very smutty. So I was trying to read romance. I just didn't know that romance existed for me.
Right.
So anyhow, then I was in the historical world, and then I was hooked and never came out of it until very recently, when I've been starting to read some contemporaries based on recommendations. And I just cannot fathom how you fall in love with a world that has cell phones. I can, because I live in it, but it's fascinating for me. So it's been fun for me to read these contemporary books, and I'm finding that I kind of maybe like them. So
I'm so proud.
I know Jessica helped with this for sure. So very exciting. And I know we've touched a little bit on, kind of the books you grew up reading maybe, or the romances you started reading. But I guess what we were wondering too was, how do you guys think that what you started reading is different from what we're writing now and what readers, are expecting today? Who wants to start on that?
You want to start, Kristin?
Sure, Alyssa. Obviously, because we live in the contemporary world, the world has changed. I mean, when I started reading, cell phones were like not ubiquitous at all. And now like we live half our lives, if not more, in our cell phones. So the challenge that I feel like I faced in my writing is, how do I include this this technology that is so inherent in our day-to-day, it's just everywhere in our day-to-day lives. But how do you do that in a way that's interesting? Because what's not interesting is reading a story of someone like one that's like, I scrolled in my phone and I did that. You know what I mean? So like, and how do you make it realistic that people are actually interacting, or especially with a romance, like people text now, so how do you get them out of their and into the real world, So I feel, especially I'm writing a YA now, I feel like I'm struggling to get like out of what are the obstacles that I'm throwing in my character's way that will like get the phone out of their hand, or like use the phone to like make them interact in real life, something like that. And social media too. I mean, that's a huge one, right? You can't like write a whole story about like what's on someone's Instagram page, but you have to incorporate it into the story because it's just there, or that it exists either.
I'm pretty sure though, Kristin, that you just wrote a book about Instagram. If I'm not mistaken.
It was a challenge.
I bet, I can only imagine. Absolutely. How about you, Lyssa?
Yeah, so what I started reading were historical. So, obviously, just the simple fact that I write in a contemporary setting is much different. But I also think that the what is vastly different, not just in what I write, but in everything that's written today, is the open sexuality of the female characters, in romance novels today. And you touched on this a little bit in your, what you said at the beginning, that there was a time period when, because of society, I mean, that there was and continues to be a societal bias against female sexuality. And so there still remains sort of an icky factor, that people don't, want to talk about it or, admit that it exists. But, when I was introduced to the romance genre, there were a lot of books in which the woman did not initiate sexual contact, was supposed to, kind of protest at first. It was almost forced to admit that she enjoyed it, because society was not comfortable with the idea of a woman openly wanting it and enjoying it and initiating it. So what's really important for me when I write today is that, that there is an equality in sexuality. There's an equality in sexual desire and who initiates it and who wants it. So I think to me, that's one of the biggest sea changes, from, really frankly, even 20 years ago, there were still some books coming out in which, you still had readers who didn't want a female character who'd had sex before. There were still books coming out at the, beginning of the 2000s, in which you had to really kind of bend over backwards to explain why a woman might be on birth control already, so yeah, I think that's been one of the things that's really important to me, is that there is no shame, in what I write today versus what, I started reading. And when you think about it, it's, well, if you go back and read some of those books.
20 years ago is 2000. That's seems very close to our time, right? I mean, and I know this is a historical, but it's been getting a lot of press just because they're making the Netflix series. But the Bridgerton book, the first one, The Duke and I, was written 20 years ago. So a lot of, there's one scene in that book that, some people take umbrage with today that they didn't take umbrage with in the big, 20 years ago. And that's it's, in my opinion, a little bit more minor than maybe some of the things we were seeing in the 80s or the 90s in romance. But I just think that's fascinating, just the evolution of the romance reader and also the romance writer, because I mean, you look at that same writer 20 years ago to today, like it's you see a difference.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
How can anybody do something for 20 years and not, change and good, growth, etc.
Yeah.
Like there's so many, 20 years is a long time.
Yeah. And editors too. I mean, editors make a difference too. What they might have told a writer 20 years ago, we might need to soften that a little bit or take that out. Today anything goes,
So fun. So Jessica, you want to carry us to the next one we have on the list?
Let's see.
I was at
number.
I think number 4.
You combined?
Yeah. I kind of combined it, but I think it's still a separate question.
Okay. So what do you think today's reader wants to read?
Lyssa, you want to start us? Oh, wait, Kristin started. Go. I was trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? Pass up that awkward, everybody talking at the same time, but instead I made it worse.
I was going to say that I think today's reader, particularly today in quarantine, wants some brain candy. They want to escape from the grim, dystopian world that we are currently experiencing. I've heard people going back to comfort reads, like rereading things that they knew, or going back to comfort authors. And honestly, I feel like this is the time for romance. Like, you're going to get a happily ever after. Like, it's going to pay off in the end and you're going to have a good feeling and it'll give you an escape. So I truly feel like that's what they're going for. Comfort reads, brain candy.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. I think that people are looking for hopeful stories right now. Books that just simply make them feel good or make them laugh out loud, or it just give them a reason to feel good about something, even if it's just for a little while. I've been I get a lot of messages, or have been the past few, several weeks of people saying, I'm so glad your book came out before the pandemic hit because, it's given me something to laugh about. And I'm like, well, okay, great. I, couldn't have predicted a pandemic, but I'm glad my book is there for you during this, But I think that people they want some hopeful stories right now. I think that certainly, dystopian still sells, but I think that reality is so painful right now that they don't want to read about it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I recently kind of went on a real reading binge kick and read 7 books, and to varying, loving them levels. And obviously they were all romances. And so there was just this absolute desire to get to the end, because that happily ever after is that kind of endorphin kick, right? And so even if it maybe wasn't my favorite read, it's this is what I need right now, and I'm going to get there, and it is still going to give me such a relief at that moment, and it's just me and my book, and it's such a nice thing to have. Right.
Yeah, I've been the same lately. It's just that we're moving. So all of our books, except for a few, are packed.
Oh, no.
So I've only been able to read what I can get online off of Libby and Overdrive and Hoopla, and fan fictions are always there. But yeah, I need some happy.
Yeah,
definitely. And thank goodness for e-readers right now. I mean, really, that's makes it really nice. Although I will say, support your independent local bookstore. I have also ordered from my bookstore too. But I love that, I at least have books at my fingertips. So yeah. So do you guys have a favorite trope? I'm curious if you have a favorite trope to read versus to write. Lyssa, you want to start that one?
Sure. I definitely love to read and write second chance stories. I like them because you jump right into the deep end of sort of the emotional pool. There's an existing set of feelings, whether they're, usually it starts out with, kind of negative feelings that they have to work through. So I really love second chance stories. And I think those are probably my favorite to write. But I also really love enemies to lovers, just because the banter is fun, and and that can just be really satisfying to see them finally sort of reach their breaking point when they start to get vulnerable with each other. I love that, so I would say those are definitely my favorite, both to read and to write.
Awesome. Kristin?
I actually really like friends to lovers, because there isn't that, because sometimes with enemies to lovers, I mean, there are some amazing enemies to lovers books that I do like, but sometimes I feel like, well, why are you forgiving the transgression? I mean, it's just maybe because I'm just like a person who has a grudge. But friends to lovers to me is so great, because there's all this shared history. So there's no getting to know you kind of stuff to get over. But then they're they're rediscovering things about each other, or finding oh my gosh, there's this thing. Well, we've always really loved each other, and this is why. For me, that is just so heartwarming. I love it.
That's really interesting. I think historicals have less friends to lovers, just because men and women couldn't be friends. Although there's the occasional, the older brother or the younger sister, right. And sometimes they get away with it that way. But yeah, no, I think that's really cool, because they have that shared history, and that makes all the difference in a lot of cases. I just read a enemies to lovers that was really good. I was very surprised by it. It was a male romance, and their families were Montague Capulet, and I hadn't read something kind of like that, where really it turned out that of course these people hated each other, but they really had no reason to hate each other. Just their families had previously wronged. So I liked that angle, and that's the fun thing about tropes, right? Is that there's always something, a little new angle that you can kind of take a spin on it. You don't have to flip it on its head, but just one little diversion can make the whole story different.
Yep.
So
yeah,
great.
I love Emma by Jane Austen. So I love the whole relationship where they've had this close friendship, and then it just becomes something else. I love that.
So I think we have a very important question here. Jess, I've highlighted it in yellow. I think we should go for
Okay, let's go for gold. Okay. Yeah. What is your favorite library memory? Your face is
Kristin, you want to start us off?
Yeah. So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and I was a big library. I went to the library twice a week. I lived in Canarsie, Brooklyn, and Jamaica Bay branch was my local branch. And I knew all the librarians all knew me by name. And I loved it so much. And so I would go to, I don't know if it still exists, but they had the RIF program, Reading is Fundamental. And they had where it was every so many books, you would get a free book. Every so many books you checked out of the library and read, you would get a free book. And they had a box. And it was so exciting going next to the children's librarian and rifling through all the books that I could get. And then they would put a sticker in the back and you could sign your name. And I was actually the youngest kid at that branch to got a certain number of books, and they threw me a party. They gave me Boggle. I love that.
Oh, that is so sweet.
In public library.
Love that.
Shaped my love of books.
Oh, wow. The librarian, that just makes me so happy.
Loved all those librarians there.
Yeah, I was the library kid too. I mean, I probably went to the library twice a week, same thing. Now, I grew up in a very, very small town. So our library was the dinkiest library you can imagine. And so I would go on the days that I knew new books were coming in, so I could, see what they had new. And the librarians knew, to sort of point out what new was, in the kids section, or as I got older, the various sections. And I think one of my funniest library memories, though, is, so my mom was the president of the teachers union, and they went on strike going into my freshman year of high school. And the strike was basically headquartered at my house. And so, for 2 weeks, when I was supposed to be starting high school, these teachers were just hanging out, were at my house day and night, striking and making picket signs and, all kinds of things. And I went downstairs one day and I said to my mom, Mom, I'm going to go meet Susan at the library. And all of these teachers start clapping, yay for library kids. So, I was definitely the teacher's pet for just simply being a library kid. But, I was bored. What I did was go to the library. But I will have to say that my favorite library story is that I went on vacation to see an aunt and uncle in Florida when I was 12, I think, 11 or 12. And they took us to the local library. This was St. Augustine, Florida. And they took us to the library the first day we got there so we could get some books to read while we were down there. And I found this obscure book called Prima Ballerina by an author named Gladys Malvern. It was written like 1952. It was like this beaten up hardcover. And it's about a ballerina who goes on her first national tour. And I read it 4 times that week. And I took it home with me. I loved it so much, I didn't return it. And so my aunt and uncle were like, we've gotten these notices about an overdue book. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what happened to that book. I'm sure I left it in that room. Nope, I had completely stolen it. So finally for Christmas that year, my dad sent a check to the St. Augustine, Florida library to pay for this book so that I could keep it. I still have it here in my office.
Oh my gosh.
I still have that book. Yeah, it's my favorite. So sorry.
That's a great story.
I'm sorry. We did pay for it. We did. I stole your book. I loved it so much. I'm sorry.
They had your photo up there.
They did.
This girl
Wanted.
Prima Ballerina.
Girl from Michigan stole our book. Yeah, I felt really bad. But I loved this. I read it like 4 times that week. It was like the best book I'd ever read.
Oh, that's really fun. My favorite library memory is just in my middle school library. So my school library, but I stumbled upon a book called The Black Stallion, and I was a horse mad girl, and I read all of Walter Farley's Black Stallion books, and I was enamored, and it was just like an absolute haze of, the same thing, like you stumble upon a book and you're transported. Yeah. And I wouldn't have found that book if I hadn't just been at the library browsing, and it did a lot for me. I loved that book. So yay for libraries.
Yay for libraries.
Talking about this. I remember I have so many memories, especially now since I work in a library, but just as someone before I worked, one of my favorite memories was in high school. I went to my high school library because I wanted to check out a copy of Jane Eyre, and the librarian let me check out the copy for the classes that were reading it. So I got it for the entire school year. So I read it so many times and I was so happy because I didn't have to take it back until the end. I just love that.
That's a nice librarian too. She got it.
She knew.
I love libraries. I get so excited when someone tweet or, post on Instagram a picture of my book or something, and I can tell that they got it from the library. I'm always like, yay, that's so exciting to me that my book is in libraries. I love that.
I also get really excited. Like my nephews get to go to the library and they get to pick out books and bring them back, and just seeing them enjoy that and having that process, like seeing young kids go to the library. It's like, I don't know, there's something very heartwarming about it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I love seeing the kiddos. It's the cutest thing.
And you guys have a really big kids section at the Escondido Library. It's
nice.
giant, like murals and like, it's fabulous.
Wow.
Fabulous. So I think we're getting a little long here. So I think we're going to wrap up if we're all good with that. But we have a couple closing questions for you guys. So I guess let's start off with what's next for you. Kristin, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. June 30th, I have my next book is coming out. It's called She's Faking It. It's about a girl who she drops out of college and lives in Pacific Beach. It takes place in San Diego, which is yeah. So I used to live in Pacific Beach. She lives in Pacific Beach, which is this, if you're not familiar with San Diego, it's this really cool town, like on the beach. And there's like a big party vibe there. So she lives there in this illegal apartment, and she door dashes for a living, except in the book I had to call it grub getting. So her only source of income, and then her dumpy car breaks down. So then she doesn't have a source of income anymore, and she's late on her rent. She doesn't know what to do. And long story short, she winds up becoming this like half-assed Instagram influencer. And she was like led by a self-help guru her name is Demi De Palma. And in this story, she is referred to as the secret meets goop for the Instagram generation. So, and then there's like this hot surfer next door that she falls in love with. And, she's like trying to balance this like fake, and he's like very anti-social media for good reason. And so she's trying to balance this burgeoning half-assed Instagram influencing career with this burgeoning romance with the hot surfer. I guess that's it in a nutshell.
That's really cute. I love it.
That sounds so cute. How about you, Lyssa?
Yeah, so the third in the Bromance series comes out October 27th. So I just finished up copy edits on that. So, I don't know when galleys or anything go out. I'm not sure when when that'll be happening, but I just signed a new deal with Berkeley for 3 more Bromance books. So I just started writing the 4th book. So yeah, so I'm not as productive as I wish I was, but so that's what's next for me.
Productivity right now. I mean, I feel like we should all just take what we can get and be gentle on ourselves,
Yeah. Doing our best.
Yes. Yeah. So I guess finally we want to know, where can readers find you, and where can they get your books? So Lyssa?
Yeah, so my books are available anywhere, libraries, of course, any retailer. Definitely support your indies. If you can order from your local indie, that's wonderful. But you can also get it, anywhere books are sold. Online, you can find me on Twitter. I spend way too much time there, just at Lyssa Kay Adams. On Instagram, I'm trying to get better about Instagram. I am there at Lyssa Kay Adams. Mostly it's pictures of my dog. Because my teenager no longer lets me take pictures of her. So it's just my dog. So yeah, best place to find me. I do have a reader group on Facebook, the Lyssa Kay Adams Book Club. So that's fun too, if you want to join. Yeah.
Awesome. Kristin?
Oh yeah, same thing about finding my book at the library. It is available in San Diego County Library, San Diego City Library. I got the audiobook too, if you want. In terms of indies in San Diego, Warwick's Mysterious Galaxy. If you're in LA, Rip Bodice. If you're in Brooklyn, Books or Magic. And any, Indie Bound, if you're just, not sure where your local indie bookstore is. And in terms of online, you can find me, KristinRockaway.com is my website. And I am most active on Instagram. Actually, I could give you some tips. Lyssa, I did a lot of research for this book.
I turned it over to my daughter. She was shaming me so much. She's like, Mom, you're supposed to like all of these comments. I'm like, okay, I You do it then. It's terrible.
We'll
Shamed by my own kid.
I'm down.
I'll take your advice.
Oh my gosh. Well, I also feel like social media, like you do what you can, right? And if it's overwhelming, like you just put it to the side. Like sometimes I feel like it's a job all in itself. So yeah, shouldn't feel.
Yeah, I've been spending more time on social media than I ever have. Always on it now.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I want to be the first, I guess. I'm going to be the first to say thank you to you guys for agreeing to come on with us, being our first guest.
No, thanks for having us. It's been fun. Definitely.
Yeah. And thanks to the Escondido Library, Jess, and you for being the brains behind this and organizing.
I'm so happy it worked out. You never know.
And I guess, thank you to both of you guys.
Thank you. Bye, Escondido.
Tea and Strumpets is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts.
Well, hello there. I'm Sarah Wendell from Smart Podcast Trashy Books, part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Smart Podcast focuses on romance fiction, the nifty folks who read it and write it, and always what books we're reading and want to tell you about. It might be an expensive podcast to listen to, but I promise great recommendations and conversations every week. We have talks about burnout with educators like Amelia and Emily Nagoski. We have gossip sessions with authors like Nalini Singh, and we're always having a good time, and I'd love it if you joined us. New episodes arrive every Friday, and you can find Smart Podcast Trashy Books on your favorite podcast app.